Okay, here we go.
Okay. Hi.
Hi, Laurence. How are you today?
I'm all right.
Good. Good, good. Thank you for opening up your home for this conversation.
You're very welcome.
Awesome.
It's nice to see you.
It's been about a year. Yeah,
Yeah.
time flies. So it's an awkward Seattle summer day, nice and gloomy, but muggy.
Which apparently you like
Oh, yeah.
gloomy Seattle summer days.
Quite a contrast from Las Vegas, which when did you return from there?
Uh, Mid late July, so almost a month ago.
Okay, cool. So I want to talk a lot about poker today, even though I know nothing about it.
Okay.
But 14 years in World Series of Poker. Um, let's just start with something very, very basic and remind me how you got started in it and when that was.
Um, well, I mean, I probably learned to play poker very young. I have no memory of actually learning, but as a kid, I was really into games and I was a math nerd. Um, and I liked sort of figuring out systems and games and puzzles and uh, strategy. So I liked poker as a kid, but I didn't really play poker even remotely seriously until uh, probably my late 20s. Um, I had been into playing blackjack, which, if you learn to play, like I learned about blackjack and about counting cards in blackjack before I was old enough to actually play it in a casino. And and then when I was old enough, I would go to casinos and try to make money by counting cards, by which you can have some advantage in blackjack.
So it was really more blackjack and then poker.
Right. By the time I felt like I was good enough at blackjack to actually have an advantage and make money, it became deathly boring because you're basically just standing there um, doing math in your head and trying not to look like you're doing math in your head because they can throw you out if they think that you're counting cards or if they think that you're counting cards effectively. Um, and that led to playing poker because poker has a social component. It's much more psychologically interesting and much more strategically interesting. I mean, with blackjack, really, you just memorize a bunch of strategy charts, and you know that if the count is above a certain amount and you have such and such total and the dealer is showing such and such card, then you should hit or then you should stand. Whereas poker, there's just infinitely more complicated strategic decisions, and there are what are called game theory optimal ways of playing, which is what you would do if you were playing against a perfect computer. And there are exploitative ways of playing, which is what you would do when you're playing against a player who is not only not a computer, but not very good. So you want to learn how to exploit them. Um, so, yeah, I would say in my late 20s, I started playing poker. Um, but even then, didn't take it really seriously. I mean, I played a fair amount and I did study what could be studied. Um, but the state of poker has changed a lot in the last 10 to 15 years. And the state of knowledge about poker has changed a lot. So the game has gotten quite a bit tougher, and it's necessary to really sort of study and
Got
learn
it.
things.
Do you think studying systems during college, did that have any kind of influence in the way that you approach these card? I don't know if you want to call it sport or game.
Well, that's a whole
That's an entire.
the question of whether poker could be considered a sport is a very bizarre and silly argument, which no one takes all that seriously because, of course, it's not a sport. But I mean, there are things in common with sports.
Sure.
Anyway, what I did in college,
It's like philosophy and systems, right?
correct. I majored in philosophy and the logic of formal systems, meaning philosophy, computer science, linguistics, artificial intelligence, basically all those things.
All that bucketed into
Yeah.
one thing. Oh, interesting. Okay.
So yeah, I mean, certainly my background as a software designer, which is what I did out of college, I mean, there's a lot of similarity with a part of that, between a part of that and approaching poker. I mean, there's a sense of looking at a problem and figuring out the steps of it and looking ahead to what's going to happen and trying to figure out the best way to sort of thread through future scenarios. And also in computer programming, there is often a sense of like resource maximization. So you want to do things that overall will minimize the amount of time required to solve a problem, or minimize the amount of hard disk space you're using, or things like that. And in poker, there's often, well, I mean, you're always trying to maximize your expected value in a hand or in a tournament.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a lot of crossover between those sides of things. I think the psychological side of poker has a lot more crossover with my training as an actor.
I was gonna ask, like, when you started getting into theater and acting, and what that timeline crossover looks like.
Yeah, I mean, that's a little, well, I guess they're both complicated. Like, they're both things that I did for a while and then stopped doing for a while and then got back to. So there's no clear, I mean, during the time that I've spent taking poker seriously, I've always been doing theater. Like, I've been doing theater more or less seriously longer than I've been taking poker seriously.
Always as an actor?
Yes, I've done a very little bit of directing. I've done basically no writing, and I've done no like stage managing or anything like that. So,
Although the concepts that you talk about as relates to computer programming and engineering, like, really relates to the goal of a stage manager, right? Efficiencies, trying to think like 3
absolutely.
steps ahead. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was gonna ask, like, as an actor, would you say that there are theatrical elements to what you do in poker?
Yes. Very much so. I mean, it's funny. I always tell this story. I've probably said it to you before, but
Let's hear it again on record.
well, now that I'm being recorded,
Right.
it seems like I should say my stock stories. There is this tendency when I tell actors that I'm a professional poker player for them to react by saying, "Oh my God, that's so terrifying. I could never do that." And there's a tendency among poker players when I say I'm also an actor for them to say, "Oh my God, that's so terrifying. I could never do that." And I kind of understand why that is. I mean, like, actors are often terrified at the idea of risking a big amount of money. And poker players sometimes act like they would be really terrified to put themselves on stage and be, even though they are on stage in some ways, but often poker players are not used to being in the limelight, and poker players often kind of fall apart when they end up on TV, or so it's understandable, but also a little bit strange that these two groups of people that are actually doing something kind of similar, look at the other side as terrifying.
I mean, do you feel like you put on, I don't know if character is the appropriate word, but like a certain persona comes out when you're at the table?
I don't try, I don't have a sort of consistent persona that I try to adopt. There are times when a situation or a particular group of people at a table that I'm playing against, or maybe the stage of a tournament, I think calls for me to have a certain persona or a certain demeanor or a certain kind of, it might be a kind of swagger or it might be a kind of even timidity, depending on what I think will best exploit the situation.
Okay. You ever see familiar faces at tournaments?
Oh, yeah, all the time. I mean, when I play in the Seattle area is kind of an anemic poker scene.
Mm-hmm.
And I only play in the bigger buy-in tournaments, which don't happen all that often. So I pretty much see very much the same group of people over and over again. In Vegas at the World Series, it just depends. Like there are certain kinds of tournaments where I will see a lot of people that are familiar to me and others where no one will be familiar.
I mean, these familiar face players, do they ever become characters in your mind where you're at the table with them and you're like, I think, or I can anticipate that they're going to do certain moves or play a certain way?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And sometimes I make mistakes about that, but yeah, I mean, if I can remember what someone's tendencies are, I can often do a decent job of predicting how they'll react to a certain situation. And it's usually a matter of like, if I can choose to do something that will, in a particular way, like maybe, I mean, it might be a matter of my behavior or it might be a matter of just my strategy. It might be a matter of like, there are times when against a particular kind of player, if I can make a very small bet, like a bet that seems too small for the situation,
Mm-hmm.
I can basically trick them into thinking that I'm weak and cause them to make an aggressive action
And clean them
and
up.
kind of trap them. Yeah.
I see. So this is you, working against other players. You told me a really great story. I think you were staying at the Mirage in Las Vegas, but was it the Flamingo? Where you basically were at the table, this one lady came,
Yeah.
and you started working with each other
I think we were playing at the Mirage.
at the Mirage.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, pretty sure.
How does that work among players? Like when you have this like unspoken communication with each other?
Well, so it was very unspoken and very implicit. I mean, we weren't actually colluding, which is illegal. I mean, in poker, you can't.
Well, that was the last time you saw her, right?
Right.
She left, and you're like, "Oh, hope she has a nice life."
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, what was interesting about that? Maybe I should just tell you the story again. I was playing in a game. This was 25 or 30 years ago, maybe. Probably not 30, but anyway.
When Vegas looked a lot different.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
and when the Mirage was at or near the top of the poker world, which it no longer is at all. So I was playing in a game with a bunch of men, and I was doing pretty well. And this young, pretty woman joined the table, and I confess that I did at that time, and I still do. If I know nothing else about someone, the fact that a player is a woman will make me expect her to not be as good. Like it's less likely that she's going to be a strong player, and I will stereotype her and expect certain kinds of play from her. I very quickly realized with this young woman that stereotyping was wrong, that she was quite good and quite strong, and that she was, I don't know if I've, even since then, 25-ish years ago, I don't think I've ever seen a woman as masterful at playing against the different men at the table and the different ways that they played badly against her. Like, because men play badly against women in in two obvious ways and in some more subtle different ways. Some men will try to bully women because they think that the woman will play really timidly, and some men will play pretty carefully against women because they think that if a woman is playing a hand, she must have a very strong hand, so they should just get out of her way. And some men will play very softly against women because they want to flirt with them, or they want to be respectful of them, or they want to, I don't know, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So she just like perfectly tuned herself to those different strategies. And I think she pretty quickly figured out that I wasn't basically doing those things against her, that I recognized that she was good, she recognized that I was good, and we kind of just stayed out of each other's way. It wasn't that we like played together against the other players. It was more like if she entered a hand aggressively, I would have to have a very strong hand to play against her. I would feel like I'm just going to back away a little bit and see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
And so we never really like banged heads against each other. Like basically if I took aggressive action against her, she tended to fold, and vice versa. And I think she made more money than I did because she had these men just like losing their minds against her.
Uh-huh.
But I did fine. So I'm not sure if that answered your question.
It does.
Other than to sort of tell that story.
It was the element of, I think, like staying out of each other's way that I forgot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Having like, two big kids on the playground. It's like, okay, I'm going to go take a sip at the drinking fountain now. Yeah.
And sometimes at poker tables that doesn't happen. Like the two strong players will feel, their egos will feel a need to clash. Huh. And often that's a terrible mistake. Like, if especially in a tournament, if I'm at a table and I recognize that there's one other very good player, like, well, I don't need to fight with him or her. And, like I should just like not worry about tangling with that person. I can tangle with the people that I can exploit.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Talking about where you've traveled internationally for poker.
I have played poker in Aruba. I've played poker in Italy, in San Remo. I've played poker in France, mostly in Paris. I'm trying to remember if I played anywhere else in France. I don't think so. I played a very little bit in Cambodia, which was funny, not a serious bit of poker there at all. I just this year went to Barcelona for my first time for a poker series. Pretty sure I'm missing a couple. Oh, Amsterdam, Prague.
Any countries that kind of stand out to you in terms of what the culture is like at the table?
Also Macau. Prague was really interesting because there occasionally were honest to God Russian mobsters playing at the table.
Okay.
Which, I mean, I was never in a situation where I felt like I was in danger, but there definitely were some sort of hard men who like there was just that they had this kind of swagger to them, and um, that yeah, there were just a couple times when someone later would tell me, yeah, they're Russians in a way that it's like actual Russian mafia. Um, Italy was really interesting. It was over 10 years ago, and I really want to go back and play poker in Italy again because probably many of my stories about poker are going to involve in some way or another the male ego. I felt like if I understood like Italian male body language better, I would have done better. And because it just felt like, and again, this is like a real stereotype about Italian males, but it felt like they couldn't restrain their behavior and their ego. Like if they were involved in a hand, especially if they felt like they had control, like they had the power because they had a strong hand, it just was not in their nature to hold that in. And I thought if I like spent more time in Italy, sort of studying those kind of behaviors, I could have done much better at the poker tables. And I'm probably not ever going to spend enough time there to actually
The easier to
get
read,
to use that.
just because it gets
Yes.
yeah.
And again, that was over 10 years ago, and there are now some very top Italian poker players, and in general, Europeans now have a kind of advantage over Americans because they can play online. So it may be that thing is no longer something that I could exploit just by, but who knows? I mean,
Mm-hmm. So when you leave home for these tournaments, I mean, aside from walking away with lots and lots of money, like what makes for a really fantastic experience? And this can be like from the moment that you sign up for a tournament all the way to the point of like when you come back home through your front door.
it's a good question. I mean, I'm not. There are poker players who kind of follow the tour, or at least they're on the road a lot during the course of a year, and that is not me. I basically choose to go to poker tournaments. I well, every year I go to Vegas for the World Series of Poker. That's just a given. Other than that, I travel to places where I would otherwise want to travel, or 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 possibly where I can stay cheaply,
Mm-hmm.
or where I have friends, or where Rachel and I would like to go together. Um, and so, what makes the overall experience good is if, aside from whether I'm successful at poker, is whether it's a fun travel destination or whether I have a good time. Um, and I have a I have a definite like love hate relationship with solo travel. Like I've done a lot of traveling by myself throughout my adult life. Some of it for poker, most of it not for poker, and I I really enjoy it from a sort of adventure point of view, and I sometimes really hate it just because it's lonely and um, feels icky. So in some ways, poker is good in that it gives me something to do. Like I, it's been a long time since I've taken a big trip by myself, not for poker.
Mm-hmm.
I think because of that side of that feeling of it just being lonely and kind of dreary to travel by oneself. Um, so sometimes, and I'm not sure I can define what makes the difference. Sometimes poker trips by myself can feel like like they were really fun aside from the poker. Like Barcelona was great. I mean, I just really enjoyed it, and I'd never been there before. Um,
But like with Vegas this year, I saw that you came back here, like literally, what was it, like for 4 days for a mental health break, and just
yes, I
to.
actually came back twice this summer. Once for a callback after I'd been in Vegas less than a week.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but then every year, pretty much, that I've been in Vegas for more than a couple of weeks, I come back in the middle to recharge and just decompress.
Mm-hmm.
I think is I think it's been like maybe 6 years that I've been in Vegas over a month every year, and since I've started doing that, it's kind of essential to get away for a little bit.
I don't know if this is something you want to disclose necessarily, but I'm curious to know if within Las Vegas, if there is a favorite venue of yours, like as it relates
Oh,
to like hotel stay, the food, like the poker
I don't I don't
room.
mind disclosing any of that.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
the Win is my favorite place to play poker. Uh, it's so comfortable and so classy, and their tournaments are really well run. They tend to charge less rake, which is like the fee that you pay
Mm-hmm.
to the house. That's how they make their money. They tend to charge a little less rake than most other places. It's just like better all around. Um, the dealers are very, very good. Uh, if I could stay anywhere in Vegas, it would be at the Win, but I'm not going to spend the money to stay at the Win. Um, I the last 3 years I've stayed at either Harrah's or the Flamingo most of the time. Um, I have preferred it in the past when I've been able to stay with a friend in a condo or townhouse off the strip. But
I feel a little bit more like at home.
yeah, and it's a better getaway. Like when you go home at night,
Mm-hmm.
you feel like you're not in the midst of a casino. But in the last few years, there hasn't been a friend that I could stay with the whole time, and B, I've had diamond status at Caesar's casinos, which means I can get really free or cheap hotel
Okay.
lodging.
No, that's an interesting mentality. It's kind of like when you have folks that work at Amazon in South Lake Union and their apartment unit is like literally 5 minutes from work. Being at a casino, staying in a room upstairs, like are you someone that prefers that kind of like work life separation?
um, I don't know if it's not quite the same thing, and I mean there are good parallels between playing poker and working an office job, but I mean, I haven't worked an office job for almost 30 years now. Um, like, I don't really think of it that way. And it's not so much that I need separation from my workspace, but having a place where I can make myself breakfast when I wake up,
Mm-hmm.
um, without going to a restaurant, and just having a place with a couch. And I mean, hotel rooms can have a couch, but just having a place that feels like a home is just a nice break from being inside a casino or a casino hotel all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So,
So how has it changed like over the past, well, I guess since 2005, right?
mhm.
Whether it be, I mean, through ways of technology and how we communicate with each other, just culture in general. Like, I don't know, like if table etiquette is such a thing and if that's evolved too, like anything and everything you might be able to think of.
Yeah. So people talk about the poker boom that started in 2003, and there are a few different things that people point to. The biggest one of which is Chris Moneymaker won the World Series of Poker main event in 2003. So he's this just like average schlub of a guy. His last name was Moneymaker.
Oh,
He was an
okay.
accountant from, I think this is wrong. I want to say Tennessee, but I mean, some southern state. He has a little bit of a southern accent. Um,
And his last name
and
is
and
Moneymaker.
he was just average Joe. He won his way into the $10,000 main event in an online satellite, meaning he only put up, I think, $40 to win his $10,000 seat, and then won $2 million in the tournament. And people looked at that and said, well, if he can win, I can win. So a lot of people started playing poker, and they started playing big tournaments like the main event, who never would have played them before. So the numbers got huge. Um, there was just this flood of people into Vegas for the World Series. At the same time, televised poker started getting more popular. They started using what are called like lipstick cameras or hole card cameras, so that you can watch TV and you could see the players' cards and know what cards they had as they're making decisions, um, which made it a whole lot more interesting to watch poker. Like if you don't know, I mean, you've watched a little bit of poker live and you don't know what people's cards are, and you have no idea what's going on. It's,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, except for a serious poker player watching, it's just not possible to get that engaged if you don't know who has the best hand and who's bluffing and things like that. So uh, the other thing that changed was that around the same time, online poker was getting bigger and bigger. And what online poker has done in the last 15 years is that it's made it possible for very young poker players to play more hands in a month than a professional poker player could have played in a year or 5 years, or because uh, a young poker player who grew up playing video games
Mm-hmm.
and who's used to looking all over a big computer screen and seeing something happening out of the corner of their eye can play 24 tables at once and just be like, with their mouse flying all over the monitor, clicking hands and making very quick decisions, and getting so much experience so fast. And so the state of knowledge of poker has just exploded to the point where there are training sites, there are books, there is private coaching, there are syndicates of players that are all staked by the same person or group of people who get training from their backers.
Now it sounds more like a sport.
Yeah, yes, a lot of similarities to that. And so the game has gotten much more sophisticated in terms of how people play and how people think about it. And it's gotten a lot harder. In 2006, when I started going to the World Series, people were terrible. And people were just starting to learn to play well. And like, yeah, everyone was terrible. I mean, even the best players, if you look back on the way they played back then, they just weren't very good.
If you were to stick, I mean, like someone who does online poker, like you said, can do many, 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 many moves. And you put them at a table though
Mm-hmm.
with other human beings, and they aren't used to that psychological
Yeah.
element, like the theatrics, the acting. I mean, do you think you'd be able to sense that right away, or don't really know if that's a question I want to ask,
Um,
but
it's, I mean, I certainly try to tell as quickly as I can whether someone is an online player. And if I'm
okay.
in Vegas at the World Series and someone's Scandinavian or German or just in general European,
Mm-hmm.
I can pretty well guess that they're an online player. And sometimes I'm wrong, but I mean, you can tell almost from a 3-word comment about a hand, you can tell that someone is an online player, like if they're using language that you just probably wouldn't know unless you were either an online player or a very sophisticated live player.
Uh-huh.
And often I can tell that someone is an online player from the size of their bet, like that. And again, it might not be that they're an online player. It might just be that they're very good or they're studied or something like that. But there are certain applications of strategy, there are certain kinds of behavior that indicate that someone is practiced in the online world. Then the other part of your question is whether, like, I can maybe exploit the fact that someone isn't used to playing live.
Yeah.
And that happens sometimes, but usually if someone is a successful online player and they're playing in Vegas at the World Series, they've probably played a fair amount live before as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, what you'll sometimes see is online players not realizing what information they're giving away by their behavior. They might not realize that it's not that great of an idea for them to look at their cards before it's their turn to act, because I can watch them looking at their cards and see whether they're going to play the hand or not. And if I know that they're not going to play the hand, that gives me a green light to try to steal. If I know that they are going to play the hand, it might shut me down from playing a marginal hand, something like that. And they just don't realize, because they're used to playing 12 tables at once or more, and they see a hand that they're not going to play on one table, and they just click the little fold checkbox, and they don't need to look at that again. It doesn't matter, because they're not giving away that information. They just act in advance.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are times when I see that and can make use of that. But
You Facebook pretty often when you're at the table. I noticed, like, when I had the pleasure watching you live and in action, not really knowing what was going on, but felt that very palpable, thick energy, tension among folks. I mean, like, folks had earbuds in, listening to music. Do you?
I never have headphones on because it's extremely valuable to be able to hear what's happening and to hear what people say and to hear their tone of voice and
Right.
things like that. So
when did you start to kind of broadcast your action through Facebook? And does it do anything for you when you're at the table?
Well, I'm actually, this year especially, I tried to do less of that while I was at the table. I still would sometimes post. When I started going to Vegas, I think already by that time I had a poker blog for a while, which I don't do anymore. I mean, it's just been replaced by Facebook. I mean, basically what I put on Facebook is pretty similar to what I used to post on the poker blog.
You do have a following too. It's a regular one.
Yeah. And what people, what almost everyone ever says to me about my Facebook posts about poker is, God, I love reading your posts. I have no idea what they mean, but I really enjoy it. Like, there's some form of that in everyone except my serious poker playing friends. And even some of them, like, I'll get pretty obscure with my poker jargon. Yeah, it's funny that the number of people I have who follow, who claim to enjoy it, and who also will say to me repeatedly that they don't understand what I'm writing. So it's sort of funny that I'm writing these posts that I know that 90% of the people reading them won't understand. But I guess I have come to believe that A, they enjoy it anyway, and that B, they can get a sense of what is going on, and C, that even they sort of enjoy reading this gobbledygook that I post about poker hands or
I think
poker situations.
you're really great about like creating characters
Mhm.
that are at the table. And I mean, like, I don't know, like, on average, how much time you might spend with these people, but like, these really just like high suspense moments.
Mhm.
Yeah, like kind of like the climax of a movie,
Right.
right? Yeah. So that's always enjoyable.
Well, and you asked me about sort of the theatricality of poker, and I think I didn't really get to answer that, but that's something that I think makes me enjoy tournaments more than cash games, because in a cash game, if you lose all your money, you can just pull more money out of your wallet and buy more chips. And so, if you get unlucky and lose your stack, you can buy more and sort of make it back. In tournaments, everything is life or death. I mean, you can re-enter a tournament up to a certain number of hours into the tournament, but you'll come back to a different table. And so all the interactions between players in a poker tournament, at any given moment, you could lose and be effectively dead.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so there's just this dynamic that happens in poker tournament tables, and it's not just in one hand. It's can develop and change and evolve over hours, and there might be someone who is really aggressive and really sort of macho and is kind of running over the table, and then they they hit their high noon showdown, like in a Western movie, and they get blasted, and maybe they don't bust out, but they get 80% of their stack is lost, and now they have a short stack and they can't bully the table anymore, and everything changes on a dime, and they're grumbling and they're pissed off, and they're, in poker we say, they're on tilt,
On tilt.
like a pinball machine.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
uh, and that is fascinating to me, and trying to sort of decipher what state someone is in and how that might change based on a hand, and um, and thinking about it like a piece of theater, I think helps me.
Does the table feel like your stage?
Uh, it doesn't. I don't know if it feels like my stage.
Or a stage
It
that you're
feels like
in?
a stage, and I might be playing a small part or a big part, but it's my job to figure out what's. I mean, just like as an actor, like
Mm-hmm.
what you want to do is figure out or react to the flow of information and behavior. So I think that a lot of my acting training, in a kind of subtle way, like it's not like I'm really thinking about it directly or explicitly this way, but I think the fact that that's how I was trained as an actor, is to walk onto the stage and react to what's happening, and and try to know who wants what from whom, and realize what I want as a character, and to use the behavior and the information that's flowing to me to get what I want. Um,
But I mean, the fact that you don't have to think about it, then it's below the surface. It's like in your gut,
I think
and
so.
it's part of your gut now.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was kind of curious too. You mentioned, having great dealers in the past, like where the aspects of a really great dealer, how they like positively or negatively affected your experiences. Because to
Um,
someone like me, they deal cards. I like, what is about them that affects your experience?
right. Well, and uh, so I said that the Win has the best dealers, like just absolutely across the board. I mean, I don't know, Aria might have excellent dealers as well. But
Mm-hmm.
for me, the dealers at the Wynn are the best. The dealers at Planet Hollywood are by far the worst. So there's just night and day between their experience levels. And what's great about the Wynn playing there is that you don't have to worry about the dealers. Like, you don't have to be watching them to make sure they're not making a mistake.
Oh, okay.
But also, a lot of them, because they're experienced and very competent, they don't have to be like watching themselves like a hawk, so they can be comfortable and friendly. And so, I mean, there are some annoying dealers at the Wynn, but by and large, they're mostly like friendly and enjoyable, and they run the game in a very professional and comfortable way, and that just makes everyone at the table more at ease. I suppose there have been times when playing at a table with a bad dealer that I probably can sort of exploit someone getting upset at the bad dealer. But mostly I just feel bad when that happens. Like, I just want to like smack the person who's
Mm-hmm.
abusing the dealer upside the head, because if a dealer's bad, it's probably they just haven't learned very well yet.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that answered your question, but
Yeah. I was kind of curious to know if it's like a matter of friendliness or like competency. So I mean, like at the Win, for example, kind of sounds like the rules of the game have become part of their gut too, where they don't even have to think about it at that point.
right,
It's just like part of the natural flow.
right, and yeah, for them it's more like knowing the protocol of how to deal with every kind of situation.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly that's the mechanics of how a dealer handles a hand and a pot, and the process of making sure everything happens fairly. But sometimes, like, an excellent dealer can diffuse tensions at a table. Like, if someone's getting angry either at a dealer or at another player, an excellent dealer can steer things in the right direction so that doesn't get out of line. And a bad dealer will either get their ego
Mixed into
on the
yeah.
line, so that they end up getting into an unnecessary fight with a player, or they just don't know how to handle a situation because they're not confident of their own skills, and so they'll just blunder in a way that makes things get worse.
Kind of talking about how things have changed over the years. When was it that Jason Somerville came out to the poker world?
6-7 years ago, I think. I'm bad with like figuring out dates like that, but that seems about
At least a
right.
handful,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And
more than 4.
have you noticed any changes in terms of homophobia in
Yes,
the poker world since his coming out? And there aren't very many,
openly gay.
yeah, or queer
Yeah, or
LGBTQI,
yes.
yeah.
But there are more, and it's gotten better. It's not anywhere near perfect.
I mean, even
And
at the tables, like, have you felt a change in terms of
yes,
how people interact with each other? And
well, the biggest change is not hearing nearly as many horrifically homophobic comments or jokes.
okay,
Um, I mean, that used to be just shameful, horrible. Um, I mean, okay, this is one from like 20 years ago, and probably was at the Mirage again, more than 20 years ago. Um, uh, and I'm sort of proud of this story, and it's sort of funny, but it is horrific. Uh, I basically pulled a move on this grizzled old guy and took a pretty big pot from him. I mean, I basically kind of trapped him, and he got really mad. He looked at me and he said, "I'm going to do it to you slow with no Vaseline."
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I mean, that's actually not the like worst example of homophobia, except more like just
More of a general threat.
more horrific, like sexual abuse
Right.
joke that he thought was cute to say. But it wasn't uncommon at all to hear fag jokes or, just similarly disturbing stuff. And I think that was probably starting to get better when Jason came out. And well, there was already Vanessa Selbst was a openly gay female top player who'd been around for a couple years before Jason came out, and there were men who everyone kind of knew were gay, but they weren't open about it. And so for Jason to write a letter to the poker world and say, here's something that I have not felt comfortable saying before, and now I'm going to say it. And he had already achieved a high level of success. And that he got an overwhelmingly positive response. Like people just flooded him with support. Some other men came out. I think that made just a huge, huge difference. And I would say it has gradually been getting better since then. And the level of homophobia is now more subtle and kind of wink wink instead of outwardly saying gross things. Like
that.
I'm trying to think of an example and I can't even, like two men would be in a pot together and they'd make some comment about how, oh, it's just the two of us again. And someone would say, like, isn't that romantic, or should we go out to dinner later? Like there's very veiled and pretty lightweight comments that you can kind of tell those guys are making just a little bit of a homophobic
versus like blatant.
Yeah.
What about, so this is for the queer community, but what about women? And I mean, do women have a larger presence now in the poker scene? Is there still
very gradual?
Yeah.
I would say that's improving, and that likewise misogyny has diminished at poker tables, but I'd say I feel worse about the state of misogyny in poker than I do about the state of homophobia in poker, which is sort of funny because, even though they're in small numbers, women have openly played poker for a long time, whereas
yes, yeah,
more than 10 years ago, I think I can't remember ever seeing a man who clearly identified as homosexual playing poker. Like they just wouldn't do it because they'd be shunned. Whereas women have consistently been sort of maltreated in a way that hasn't improved all that much. Like, I mean, I've told you at the beginning of this talk that I will stereotype a woman. I mean, I will make all kinds of stereotypes about people based on race, based on age, based on just kind of what they look like, what country they're from. But I mean, I'm I'm doing that just as a way to make a snap guess, and I try to be very quick about figuring out if I'm wrong. And um, I feel like I recognize that I do something at a poker table that would be unacceptable in the social world, and that I would be quick to, call someone out on if I see it in the rest of the world. But the truth is, it helps me in poker. But anyway, in terms of women, how women are treated at the poker table, there are various things. There's this bizarre phenomenon that men think it's okay to talk about how a woman played a hand or how a woman plays in general right in front of her face. And like as if she's not present. And it's this weird thing that is it's so insulting. Like, I mean, I might make some judgments based on someone's gender about how they're likely to play, but I'm not going to then say after they've played a hand, oh yeah, I knew she had a strong hand because she only plays really strong hands. She's not creative enough to play, to bluff in that spot. I might believe that, and I might be proven wrong, or I might be confirmed in my belief, but I'm not going to talk about it in front of her. And I feel like, I mean, there has been a significant campaign in the poker world to make women, to try to be more welcoming of women poker players, and to try to not make it such an intimidating like barrier to entry, the fact that there aren't very many of them around. And sometimes you see people, I think men, doing that very well, and just trying to be comfortable and friendly with women at the table, complimenting them if they played a hand well, just treating it like a normal situation. And there are times when you see men just
being really disgusting.
Yeah, and
yeah.
There was, I think it was this summer that, oh yeah, I was playing in a seniors event. So seniors events are for people 50 years or older. And I was at a table, a woman joined the table. Fairly soon after she joined the table, a man, and I can't even comprehend this, like it must have been his first seniors event, because he said, oh, I didn't know women were allowed to play in seniors events. And like what? Like there are actually more women in seniors events than in non-seniors events. I think because it's a sort of restricted community in one way. Like you don't get the like young jackass boys who are like annoying to older women. And
what was it in front of her, and did she have a response, or how did she respond?
She did. She like, I mean, she clearly was a somewhat experienced player. Like she wasn't just like this middle-aged woman who plays coffee table games. Like she knew what she was doing, and she like prodded him repeatedly. Like she kept sort of saying like, what would make you think that? Or how could you possibly imagine that women weren't allowed to play? And she very successfully put him on the defensive and got him really flustered, and made it very clear very quickly that she knew a whole lot more about poker than he did. And I don't think she did it. It wasn't malicious exactly. Like she really was asking him, how could you think that? And like, other men at the table were kind of thinking the same thing. But
I
I
think
thought,
that sometimes that's like the most potent approach is
mhm,
like just being very sincere, like not throwing anything like mean or malicious, but
right,
just an honest
yeah.
question. And then, yeah, sometimes that's the best way to confront. And then, like, they'll really think about hopefully later. Um, but let's end things on an interesting note.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Like, whether it be, I mean, you're kind of choosing the tone of the ending here. I was going to ask, like, what's one of the weirdest things that you've witnessed in a poker room or experienced yourself?
Um, Weirdest things. I've seen someone throw a chair at another player.
Oh,
uh, that was in. Oh, I didn't mention this in travels. Another Caribbean island, Saint Martin, which has a Dutch and a French side. On the Dutch side, there's a poker room, and I was playing there late at night. I think I was playing in a cash game actually, and at another table, two guys started fighting. There were older guys, each of whom I'd played with before, and they were just like really yelling at each other, and clearly they'd sort of stopped play, and they were kind of standing up, and the floor guys were kind of keeping them apart, and one of them picked up a chair and threw it at the other guy and missed him, but
thankfully.
yeah. And they like made the guy who threw the chair leave for a while, and then he came back in and was playing with the same guy again later. I mean, I think that's maybe in a general sort of way, that's a very weird thing that you see in poker, is people getting so incredibly heated to the point where like steam is coming out of them, and then like an hour later or 2 hours later they'll calm down and be back playing. And sometimes they can't do that. That's not the best, like, weirdest thing.
It's a violent thing.
Yeah.
Can end things
Well,
on a
yeah.
violent note.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. Someone threw a chair at another player, and I was one table over.
Okay. So, but no one got harmed.
Correct. Yeah.
That's good.
I have never gotten into a physical fight. I have had someone at a poker table tell me that I smelled like shit. Clearly because he was mad about something I had done in a poker hand, and told me I smelled like shit, and that I smelled bad, and he offered, not seriously obviously, to go and get me some deodorant out of his truck. And I said, would you? That'd be awesome. I would really, really appreciate that. And that just made him so much madder. And at some point later on, like maybe a half hour later after this blow up, I busted him out of the tournament, and he walked away like flipping me off the whole way. And again, I think repeating that, telling me that I smelled like shit. Oh, and this summer, I managed to get a guy to, for a whole hour, give me the finger by putting it next to his nose.
Uh-huh.
And he just like kept doing it. He kept like rubbing his finger next to his nose. Sorry, this doesn't come out, visually in your recording, but he like did this, usually not looking at me, but it was clearly at me after something that happened in a hand. And yeah.
And that was
there
his
you go.
way of serving it to you.
Yeah, that was one of the most bizarre things
I
that
think my
I've seen.
biggest takeaway from this is just the male ego.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think so. I've done some coaching of women players, and I think if a woman can learn to play poker decently well and can learn to navigate and manipulate the male ego, she can destroy us. So there. I'll leave the interview on that note. How about that?
There we go.
Crush the male patriarchy.
Within the poker world.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Laurence.
You're welcome.